Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The Australian Grand Prix is this weekend, and me and my Twitch chat decided we are going to throw our hats in the ring and see what predictions we can make, see what we can get right, see what we end up getting wrong. We're just trying to have a little bit of fun with it as this F1 season gets underway. We make some crazy predictions in terms of biggest surprise of the weekend, biggest disappointment of the weekend. We even try and nail the top 3 spots in both qualifying and in the race itself, as well as one special prediction right at the end that you're going to have to stick around for. If you enjoy Formula One content, whether games or in real life, go ahead, hit that subscribe button below. And we do plenty of Formula One content here on this channel. Go ahead, also drop your predictions below along with us. See what you can get right and see what you end up getting wrong as well. But for that, let's go ahead and get into our first prediction. Our first prediction for the Australian Grand Prix is, I think, a fun one to always do, and that is our best good surprise of the race weekend. And in this one, I've gone a little out there. I'm definitely willing this into existence a little bit. I think my biggest positive surprise going into the Australian Grand Prix is going to be Logan Sargeant scores his first World Drivers' Championship points this weekend in Melbourne, Australia. I think he's been very much a positive surprise going into the first 2 rounds of the season so far. I think when you replace a driver like Latifi, maybe the expectations going in for him weren't as high as, say, Oscar Piastri or even Nick De Vries in the McLaren and AlphaTauri respectively. But I think Logan Sargeant has silently and beneath the covers kind of put in a very, very respectable first 2 rounds of the season. And I think it culminates this weekend, coming off of a difficult street circuit in Jeddah Corniche circuit, and you head to the Albert Park street circuit in Melbourne, Australia. And I think he puts it all together that Williams has shown itself to be surprisingly competitive. And I think if Albon didn't suffer his brake failure in Jeddah, I think he was even scoring points in the second round of the season. And so my biggest positive surprise, Logan Sargeant scores his first World Drivers' Championship points. And if you want to join in on the discussion, you can head over to the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Mr. Dakota and the number 0. You can get in, voice your opinions, and it'll be included here for every race weekend of this season. And our official chat prediction is a consensus that we think that Mercedes is going to come in and potentially be challenging Aston Martin and maybe even Red Bull this weekend here in Australia. I think it might be a bit bold, but at the same time, what are we if not bold in our predictions? Okay, our next prediction is the inverse of our first. What do we think is going to be the biggest disappointment of the Australian Grand Prix? And I've picked a pretty safe one, but I think it'll also be extremely disappointing. And I've gone for that McLaren once again does not score any points, and I don't think it'll be particularly close. I think a lot of us have kind of just been waiting for Lando Norris and even Oscar Piastri to kind of click into gear, and even if their car may not be quite as good as we were hoping it was going to be at the beginning of the year, I think we're all still just kind of waiting for it all to kind of click into place. Even in Jeddah, we saw Oscar Piastri reach Q3, qualify in the top 10, but then just very bad luck and very poor circumstances forced them down the order by the end. And so I think a lot of us, like I was saying, is just waiting for it all to kind of click together. And even if it won't be the most competitive car on the grid, it definitely probably shouldn't be running P19 and P20 every weekend that we've seen so far. But I think a lot of us are expecting to see a positive result from McLaren this week. But at the same time, I feel like the McLaren disappointment is just going to continue on and on. And until they prove otherwise, I think it could be a long year for the men in papaya. All right, and as for our chat's prediction on the biggest disappointment of the Australian Grand Prix weekend, we have a lot of Checo fans in the chat. And so their biggest disappointment prediction is that Checo is not going to win the Australian Grand Prix. I think we'll be very lucky to see another qualifying snafu like we did in Jeddah with Red Bull and Max Verstappen in particular. So we don't see any issues coming up for Max in qualifying this time around. And so when Max qualifies near the beginning and near the front, he usually ends up finishing pretty quickly up there. So unfortunately, our biggest disappointment from the chat is that Sergio Perez does not win the Australian Grand Prix. Okay, we've done our biggest good surprise and we've done our biggest disappointment. So here we are, the nitty-gritty qualifying results, P3 to P1 predictions coming at you. In P3 for qualifying around Australia, I have gone for Charles Leclerc. I think Charles has done pretty okay with a Ferrari that has proven to be less than competitive so far, but I think there's something about Australia that just speaks with Charles, and so I think he's going to come out and wanting to have a very good weekend. I think he's going to put it in P3 here in Australia. And then for P2, I think it'll come as no surprise. We've gone for the Red Bull of Sergio Perez. Coming in P2, I think another street circuit. Checo has proven time and time again to be a street circuit savant. And so I think he'll come in a very, very good car around another street circuit and put in another solid result for the Red Bull outfits. And that leaves P1 pole position for the Australian Grand Prix. Can't be anyone but the reigning World Drivers' Champion Max Verstappen, who we can't see having another mechanical breakdown in qualifying again. And if we do, I think some of us will take it in terms of excitement levels for the weekend, but I think Max Verstappen is going to put it on pole. I don't know if it'll be particularly close, and I think that'll put him in great position going forward into race day. So I don't know if it'll be the most exciting qualifying, but I think it will be fun to watch regardless. And as for our chat predictions, we actually have a split decision here. For P1, they all go for Max Verstappen. I think we all can understand Max wanting to come out after probably what might be in his mind a poor result around Jeddah and come through and just put an absolute stonking lap in to really set the tone going forward here. So Max Verstappen takes pole position is pretty much a consensus around these parts, as well as P2 second slot on the grid. Checo Perez coming in. I think that Red Bull is just very, very good, and I think it would not be surprising to anybody to see a Red Bull front row lockout come this weekend. And now this is where the split comes in. We have a difference between only a couple of drivers for P3. One, Charles Leclerc, and one, Lewis Hamilton. We have a Mercedes believer in the chat, and so he thinks that Mercedes could come out and perform very, very well, and thinks Lewis Hamilton is going to put it in P3 coming out of qualifying around Australia. This is going to be fun. I love when we get a little bit of disagreement. I think it proves to be quite entertaining, but we'll hopefully see something exciting happen in qualifying on Saturday. All right, and last but not least, the granddaddy of them all, our race finishing positions for the podium. We'll go ahead, we'll start P1 because I think this has been a consensus by pretty much everyone, and I don't think any of us would be too surprised. I've gone for Max Verstappen winning the Australian Grand Prix. I don't think it'll be particularly close. Like I mentioned earlier, I think he'll feel like he has something to prove coming off of Jeddah, where he managed to go from P15 to P2. But I think in his eyes, he'll look at it as a failure because he did not win the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, starting from 15th. And so I think he's going to come out extra motivated. And I think Verstappen is going to put it on the top step of the podium around Australia, and I don't think it'll be close. As for P2, I've gone for, surprise, surprise, Sergio Perez. I think Checo in that other Red Bull will put in a very solid performance as well. I mean, we saw in Baku when these two Red Bulls start at the front, they'll basically drive off into the distance, and I don't think it'll be a particularly exciting race at the very front. We may get some exciting battles in the beginning, but I think eventually those two will just pull too far away, just a smidge, and I don't think it'll be a particularly exciting 1-2 around Australia. But for P3, the final step of the podium, I have gone for Charles Leclerc. I think Charles is going to become very motivated to have a good result. I think he likes Australia, just personally. I mean, he got the win there last year, and so I think he's going to be extra motivated, kind of like Max in a different way, to come in, finally put in like an above average result and kind of drag a struggling SF23 a little higher up than maybe it should be compared to some of the other cars on the grid. But I think Charles is going to come in this weekend extra motivated and potentially put it on the final step of the podium. And as for our chat predictions, we have a bit of a split field again here, except for one spot, and that is the top step of the podium, P1 at the end of the race. Max Verstappen is the consensus winner of the entire weekend, I think, across this channel. So I don't think there'll be any surprises to see the chat go for Max winning the Australian Grand Prix. And the real excitement comes through for the second and third step. We have a split decision between Checo Perez and Fernando Alonso. We have a believer of some potential chaos and maybe some potential excitement coming down the stretch that may allow Fernando to sneak by Checo by the end of the race and take that second step of the podium. And obviously we've already covered Checo being in that other Red Bull, and definitely has the moves to get there into the P2 as well. And then for P3, basically the inverse. We have an Alonso and Checo P3. So I think it's going to be, the chat seems to think it's going to be a very similar podium that we've seen already twice this season of both Red Bulls and one Fernando Alonso. It could be exciting, potentially the order, but it may just be a very, very similar sight as we continue on this 2023 season. And finally, we would be remiss on this channel in particular to not give our official Haas predictions for the Australian Grand Prix, and I have gone big this weekend. I predict 2 Haas cars into Q2, 1 Haas car into Q3, and Haas scores points 2 races in a row coming off of a single race point for Kevin Magnussen out of Jeddah. I predict that Haas will score once again here in Australia. Don't even care who it is. I think one driver is going to put themselves in a position to score more points around Australia, and I cannot wait to see Haas continue to just slowly creep their way up the World Constructors Championship ladder, fighting our way down this season. It's going to be great. Can't wait to see it. I think Haas does a very good job this weekend and scores points once again as they cross the checkered flag. And finally, our chat predictions for the Haas results this weekend are as follows. We have one prediction for K-Mag in the points. We love to see that. And we have another one very specific. We have a Nico finishing P11 and a Kevin Magnussen finishing P14. Very much in the mix, but just outside the points. Well, that wraps up our predictions video for the Australian Grand Prix. What do you make of my predictions or my Twitch chat's predictions? Leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think of my predictions, and go ahead and leave yours as well. We'll see which of our predictions come true, not but a few days from now. I couldn't be more excited that this Formula One season is underway. Hopefully you'll enjoy it too, as well as come on the ride with us. We do lots of F1 content around here. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and we'll see you guys after the Australian Grand Prix to see which ones we get right, which ones we get wrong. Hopefully we all have a good time. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.